welcome to the Miscarriage Rebellion. I am Stacey June Lewis, lead of the Pink Elephant Support Network group counselling program Grief and Grace, and along with Pink Elephant's co-founder and CEO Sam Payne, through this podcast we will share the stories of many Australians who have lost their babies to early pregnancy loss. With evidence and empathy, we unpack the shame, blame and stigma and lack of support that they may face. This is a loss that has been silenced for far too long, and we deserve better. We are here to normalise the conversation and to make lasting change. In this important chat, Sam chats with Isy Oderberg, founder and executive director of the Early Pregnancy Loss Coalition, who shares how her personal journey through 7 losses inspired her to fight for systematic change. The core of the conversation focuses on reproductive justice, while quality care must be driven by centering marginalised people who face intersectional disadvantage and trauma. Isy and Sam celebrate huge wins for this sector, from securing the first dedicated miscarriage funding to establishing new clinical guidelines. And they both move into an explanation as to why this sector is acting as a canary in the coal mine, offering crucial lessons on how society talks about grief and medical misogyny.
On today's Miscarriage Rebellion podcast, we are joined by Izzy. Welcome, Izzy. Really excited to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great privilege. I'm happy to be here.
Izzy is an incredible woman in the space of early pregnancy loss, doing amazing work to make some massive changes. And it's an incredible pleasure to work alongside you in this sector and see the changes that you've driven. We're going to hear a little bit more about them today, but just to provide a bit of context to our listeners and our community, if you could just share a little bit about what brought you to the space of early pregnancy loss and why you authored this incredible book, Hard to Bear.
So firstly, I learn from the best and you are one of them. So thank you for that. And it's always a pleasure to collaborate with amazing women in any space, but this space in particular. So where do I start? I met my husband. We decided to have a family, got pregnant for the first time in my life, and I had a miscarriage. Sort of classic chromosomal abnormality, early, I think I was about 8 weeks, missed miscarriage. Waited a little while, tried again and got pregnant with twins, but unfortunately miscarried one twin. But the other twin is my beautiful boy, who's now 9 years old. Got through the first time parenting and then decided we would like to have another child. So we started trying and that led to 5 losses in a row. All my husband had to do was sneeze and I would get pregnant and just could not quite get past, the first trimester. And, I had pretty much everything. I had missed miscarriages. I had miscarriages where I saw the heartbeat and just it didn't work out. I had a termination for medical reasons. I really did spread my experience around all of the different options, so to speak, in this world. And then I got pregnant with my daughter, who is now 5. So I got my angel, 5 times rainbow pot of gold angel, beautiful sweetheart. And then once I had being a journalist and an author, I'd had a lot of people asking me to write about my experience, and I never wanted to do it until I knew my journey was over, because I felt like it was just very hard to write about that journey when you're in the journey and you needed to finish the journey to have the hindsight. So once my daughter was born, I decided to take maternity leave, as you do, and you should, because it's a lot of a thing carrying a baby and having one. So I sort of took some time off and I started doing some reading to answer some of my own questions about my journey and just questions that I had, And in doing that, I sort of thought, well, maybe I'll write something about this. But the more I started reading and the more I talked to people, the more I found that there was a commonality in the disappointments of care. That people were experiencing, and also some really fascinating answers to the questions and going, wow, that is really interesting, And unfortunately for me, I realized that it wasn't an article or a feature. It was too much. It was going to be a book. And I had never wanted to write a book. And I was I have really severe ADHD. So the idea of writing anything beyond a long feature is oh my God, overwhelming. So I went to my husband and I said, I think I should use my maternity leave to start working on this idea. And that's what I did. And then that transitioned into COVID. So, I had a lot of time to sit around the house and research and write. And I wrote my book. And one of the most important takeaways for me was that I looked at other areas of care that were also in the women's or with female presenting health space. Non-binary included and otherwise gender diverse, but ultimately people with uteruses. And I started looking at some of the other issues like endometriosis. I looked at stillbirth, and the one thing that I found was that when these sectors, if you like, got together and decided as a sector what they needed and prioritized it together and provided a collective voice to government, that's how change came about. And that was my contention in the book, and that is always what I planned to do. And that's what I did. So the book was released, and with two other co-founders, we founded the Early Pregnancy Loss Coalition. And I took over as, at the time, I was chair and CEO, and we've now sort of become more sophisticated and mature and decided we need a separate chair. Like I talk about the Hunger Games of funding a lot, and especially in the women's health space, everyone has been underfunded and everyone's been trying to stay afloat, and it's heartbreaking and it creates trauma. Like, it's about sitting everyone down and saying, we are not in competition with each other. We are not. We actually can lift each other up and make space for each other and say, well, what's the point of us both doing X, Y, Z when you could do that and I could do this, and then we're not in competition, sort of thing. And it's so important to start healing that trauma and working together, and I really, really hope that has been done as well.
Yeah, massively. I think it also increases choice for the person who's trying to, if it's from a support perspective as well, because not one size fits all. I use this menial example all the time, but you do your food shop and you choose Harris Farm, Aldi, Coles. It's your choice, right? It doesn't matter. It's a food shop. However, you lose a baby and there's only one organization that offers this type of service. There should be multiple, and then also the other thing, the systemic change around that needs to be considered from multiple angles as well.
Totally agree. So yeah. And it's funny because, like obviously I spoke to a few different people who worked for similar coalitions in setting up, because I was like, what works, what doesn't work? I haven't done this before. And like, I think there was a lot of warnings to me about, if it falls apart, which it has done in other spaces, it can be very painful and very time consuming and whatever. But like, honestly, I am shocked in a good way that honestly we're all like really on the same page. Like we all know what is needed. There hasn't been a lot of disputes or debates or, kind of friction. It's just, everyone knows really what we need and everyone's on board. So it's actually been a lot less of the umpiring that I thought I'd have to do, and it's a pleasure. Like it's a joy, and the great thing, in a sort of black comedy way about working in a space that's had so little love. It's that we have wins all the time, and it's like super amazing, So that's like super positive as well. Like it gives you hope, because it's like, oh, we haven't had a win in a couple of weeks. Let's just do something to.
And then something will come from it, yeah. And there's definitely a shift. There is more attention on early pregnancy loss, miscarriage now. I've had like for 10 years, and that's exciting. I want to pull us back before we get to the kind of what next in the hope stage. I just want to pull us back to what came from your book. Like drill down a little bit and talk me through some of the kind of diverse voices that you reached out to, interviewed in your book. What are their experiences of early pregnancy loss? How is it even harder for them to walk through a system that obviously you've got medical misogyny from the gender perspective, and then on top of that, if you're a woman of colour and you come from a different cultural background, what does that mean for you?
So I guess what's interesting, just to sort of give a little bit of background, is when I started writing the book, I have a writers group, which a lot of people do have, but I started writing the book and I sort of had the chapters, and one chapter was about diversity and challenge. And immediately a few of the people in my writing group who identify as being from diverse background were like, you can't do that. You cannot relegate it to one chapter. Has to be all the way through. Has to be embedded. And I thought about it and I thought, you are absolutely right. And I scrapped the entire book and I started again. And I really do feel, well, when I say entire book, I was about 3 chapters in, but I did, and I think that was incredibly important, and I never regret it for a minute. I think absolutely it was really important feedback, and the only thing that I did do was there is a separate chapter about Aboriginal experience because I felt it was so important, that not only is there the experience of Aboriginal people the whole way through the book, that also got its own chapter. I think more important, given that I wrote the book on stolen land. But for that, I got a lead author who is Aboriginal, who is a trained midwife, who worked on birthing on country and who also has had losses. And it was very important to me that I not lead the chapter of that book, that someone else lead it, and that I just support that person, and that was Charisse Buzzacott, who remains a friend, sits on the board of the EPLC now and is phenomenal. But it was, I think as well, I got very deep into the reproductive justice movement, and there are a lot of fundamental misunderstandings about reproductive justice. Reproductive justice is not just abortion, it's about reproductive health and social justice. It's a combination of the two. It's a concept that was defined and expanded on by American civil rights activists, and Loretta Ross and others. But what the whole, and I will leave the listeners to go and read about reproductive justice, which I highly encourage them to do. But the fundamental basis of reproductive justice is it's about intersectional disadvantage, intersectionality, which is layers of disadvantage and how they affect someone's experience, and specifically in reproductive health and healthcare. But also, you must center marginalized people at the center. So it's a top down, trickle down change doesn't work. It has to come from them, for them, and from them first. So in the book, I speak to a range of different people, gender diverse, LGBTIQ plus, Aboriginal, people with a disability, a range of those people, to understand how those layers of disadvantage affect their care. And there's zero question, because the data tells us so, but also because the people tell us so, that people who have that disadvantage experience much more disappointing care, and in some cases, really, really substandard care. And reproductive justice, importantly in the loss space, is not just about access to contraception. It's actually about the ability of people to have and safely parent children. I was speaking to an Aboriginal doctor who was treating an Aboriginal patient, and this Aboriginal patient had experienced a lot of things that people from marginalised communities do experience, suboptimal sexual health, previous pelvic inflammatory disease, and severe endometriosis. And this person was actually in their late 40s by the time this doctor saw them. And they said, "So throughout your health journey, were you ever offered IVF?" And this patient said, "No, I was never offered IVF because, I think they assumed I couldn't pay for it." And that is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Putting aside the fact that IVF is so expensive that it excludes a lot of patients, beyond that, this patient was never even offered that as an option, right? Because of racism, because treating doctors assumed that they couldn't pay for it. That's the essence of reproductive justice, is that all choices should be available to all people, but more so for people from marginalized communities who are more likely to experience adverse outcomes. So understanding that and understanding those challenges is like really key to good care.
Yeah, 100%. And it's access to healthcare, right, that should be equitable, and it's not happening equitably at all. And you talk about the reproductive side of things and IVF, and absolutely, most IVF clinics are private equity owned now, and obviously the issues that arise from that, and obviously the fees, all of those things, and how we add layers. And there's just so much work still to be done alongside this as well in that space. I mean...
Yeah. And I think in the support space, which is particularly relevant, I think, to Pink Elephants and to you, I had a very interesting story about a same-sex couple, both female and female identifying. One partner had several losses and made the decision that she would wanted the other partner to then try.
Mm.
The other partner tried, got pregnant, advanced stage of the pregnancy, and they went to like a Lamaze, what do you call it? Like pre-birth
Yeah,
classes.
birthing classes.
And they said birthing classes, that's what I'm trying to say in English. And they were told, okay, so now I want you all, including the partner, the non-birthing partner, to pretend that you're pregnant and start going, and whatever. And this person had experienced multiple losses and was just incredibly pained and traumatized by that process. And it had never occurred to the leader of this birthing class, which by the way was not specifically targeted at LGBTIQ plus, that this female non-birthing partner may have experienced loss. And that's just an example of like, how does this person who comes from a marginalized group have potentially a different experience? How can I allow for any trauma they may have experienced? And it's, from a support point of view, it's just as important as the medical care. And you know this, I know you know this, but a lot of people don't.
No.
And it's about having those conversations.
It's also about empowering providers of services and support and health professionals who touch women anywhere in the health system to pause, to think before they deliver. And I don't think that happens in such a broken healthcare system, because the pressure that they're under to provide and the rates and things like that. You hear obviously all the emergency stories, and we've got a whole podcast episode on that with Sophie, who's our service delivery manager. And you just, the system itself is stacked against them. So what we're not saying is, hey, you're doing this wrong, you're a terrible person, you haven't considered this. What we're saying is actually we need systemic change that will not only drive benefits for the pregnancy loss sector, it'll drive benefits for all of the healthcare sector, right? Giving that ability to just stop and consider. I know even from Pink Elephant's perspective, we're often asked, why don't you translate your resources into X number of languages? And I'm like, because that's not culturally appropriate. Because the meaning
more than just translation with Google Translate.
God, and it's frustrating because why are we still having these conversations in 2025? Why don't people think about this? And so we're doing some work with other organizations like East Africa as well. They're driving their own early pregnancy loss support, and we're going to try and amplify it and help them get more reach. They should drive this support that their community need, to your point before.
What's really interesting is like this transition to a sort of midwifery group care model where you've got that sort of continuity of care in the public system, which is particularly relevant for people who've conceived after loss. And what's really interesting is that was set up to take care of high needs patients who really, really could benefit from continuity of care. Now, I would put Aboriginal patients in that, in that a lot of them have experienced medical trauma. They've been treated in a substandard way in hospital systems. They're very often, not everyone, but a lot of Aboriginal patients are scared of seeking care in the hospital system for a variety of reasons. And what is interesting is that, a lot of those services are really being accessed by the patients who don't need it because they're educated and articulate and they know how to access them. They're aware of them and they know how to access them and advocate for them. And it's really, really disappointing. And it's like, Aboriginal women aren't approaching us and asking to be part of this service. And it's like, why do you think that is? Because they don't know about it, because they haven't been told about it, because they don't know how to, they aren't necessarily going to, articulate themselves in an environment where they're terrified because they've been treated really badly, or like, tell me why you think they're not accessing the service that might actually help them, So it's very disappointing that, we talk about it a lot, but I'm not sure in practice that it is necessarily, put into day to day.
Yeah, it's not translated. I think that leads us quite nicely to another intersection, which is the guidelines, because excitingly, EPLC have worked with Ransgog on these new guidelines for early pregnancy care. But again, one of the things that sometimes pushes back against guidelines is, well, how do we then roll them out so they actually play out in everyday care and they're not yet another guidelines that sits somewhere on a system? But take us back first, talk us about these guidelines. We are going to obviously bring Nisha Cott on as well to talk about these, but talk about the role that EPLC played and what your hopes are for these guidelines.
I think, with the work of the EPLC, I suspect that it potentially added to those voices and encouraged it. So, we're very, very, very happy that they've been done. We think there's always room for improvement, and all clinical guidelines will, as they should, be consistently reviewed. every few years we'll work again with RANZCOG. But in terms of like, we now have guidelines for the first time. It is 100% a positive development. And so the guidelines were developed by a clinical group within RANZCOG, or set up by RANZCOG, and we then worked with that group to provide feedback and whatever we could to support it. We then very much supported the release of the guidelines so that to push that to doctors and medical professionals so that that they were as widely known about as possible. It takes a very, very long time when it comes to new medical research for it to work its way from, I mean, this isn't a piece of research, it's a guideline, but ultimately it's a similar thing, to make its way from being a piece of paper to being used in the consulting room. And all we can do is keep talking about it and keep talking about it, keep doing podcasts like this, keep doing articles in the paper, keep, agreeing to do anything that RANZCOG wants us to do in order to promote this at conferences or anything else. I recently came back from a RANZCOG conference in Queensland where I talked about the guidelines, but there was also a doctor there who spoke more specifically. But I spoke about the EPLC, the guidelines, some of the wins that we've had, and anything that we can do to support getting that out there, is great. I think patients also, where comfortable, and it is about comfort level. But if they, feel they've not had, optimal care, they can read the guidelines as well. They're freely available and say, well, what do the guidelines say? The guidelines are not designed for patients, but they certainly are available if that's something that you want to do and want to understand. So yeah, we just have to keep talking and talking and talking and pushing and pushing. And, cultural change is slow, but we've proven it can be done.
Yeah. And I think it's things like the language around things like recurrent pregnancy loss, the language around medication choices after loss, all of those things, the progesterone argument that's in there. And we'll get, obviously, Dr. Nisha to unpack those from a medical perspective. But to
Absolutely.
your point, what they do is they allow our community somewhere to read. And then if the health professionals are up to that level yet, they can go, hey, but these guidelines say this. And they can have a conversation with a healthcare professional and feel, I don't like the word empowered, but I'm going to use it here because it says they're disempowered already. But you know what it's like when you're in this fight or flight, you're desperate for another baby, you're struggling to conceive again, you're not sure why this keeps happening to you, and looking for information and being told differently by different people. These guidelines allow you to find some information that is evidence-based. And I think that's something that's really important for our community, because we do see this is a topic that's heavily searched on social media. And whilst some information is correct, others is maybe driving down the line of something completely random, right?
And this because you run these support groups online, and there are definitely support groups that aren't moderated and aren't watched. And I think that when you're in the middle of loss, you want to be around other people who've had losses. It's really intrinsically embedded in you. Oh my gosh, like, this is the thing, is like, while miscarriage brings grief and sadness to so many people, and I have to emphasize, not everyone who experiences miscarriage has heavy grief and whatever, but to a lot of people it's a lot of grief and it's a lot of sadness. But the thing about a sector that's been overlooked and ignored for so long is there is so much that we can do, from low-hanging fruit that we can do tomorrow to big picture stuff, and there is so much improvement that we can make. And while that might sometimes feel overwhelming in the sense that, like, some of these things are really big projects, it gives me so much hope because there's so much we can do. I mean, in 20 years, when we do this podcast again and we look back at the dark days when miscarriage wasn't understood and, whatever, like, if nothing has changed, I would be, really, really sad. But I suspect that it will, because we've already seen the change happening. And that brings me so much hope, because we've only just started. Like, we've only done 1/1,000,000th of the things that we want to do, and so once we get going and we've done 50% of the things we want to do, I think we'll be looking at a totally new landscape, both in terms of how people are treated, the support that they get, the medical care that they receive, because we're going to get medical research funded and, potentially reduce the number of losses. We'll never get rid of losses completely. The way the human body is built, they are always going to happen. But it is my belief that there are some losses, that if we can identify the cause earlier on, that there are potential treatments that we can use. And we've seen this in some of the research that's coming online, for instance, about, endometrial lining and things like that. There is not by no means is it a done deal, but there's a lot of hope and a lot of optimism that we've identified new factors that can be treated. So, especially in the recurrent miscarriage space, to give people hope, I am not in any way lacking in hope. I really, really am not. Sometimes I feel very tired and overwhelmed, but I'm very, very hopeful going forward. So there's a difference, Yeah.
There is. And I completely agree. Even in the 10 years we've been in this space, just felt like such a distinct lack of research in the first part of this, and now that is changing, and now then there's up to organizations to kind of amplify it and to turn it into meaningful service delivery, to advocate for the policy change that needs to happen, and all together then the system becomes a different system to what it is now, and we will start to foster more empathy and understanding to what this is for many people, the death of their baby, but then have a system that does not add trauma when they do not need added trauma on top of what is already an incredibly emotionally distressing time for many. And as you said, not all, but I know that the majority, it is. It's a thing.
And I think that the other thing is, like, I really still don't think that there is a full and complete understanding of how many people are affected by loss. I think that for starters, it is my personal belief, and I make this contention in the book, although there is some data to support this contention, but data, you can make any contention seem okay if you mix it the right way. But I personally believe that the 1 in 4 number is a downplay of how many people experience loss. And I also believe that those numbers are going up based on anecdotal evidence, but also some data that comes out of America. So I think that we really don't have a full and complete picture of really how many people are experiencing it in Australia every year. But what I do know is that when I go to events where I'm speaking, I will sometimes say, and as I did last week, actually, I said, so, how many people in this room have had, know someone who close to them who has had, or know someone they work with closely who has had an early pregnancy loss, and there was not a single person in that room who didn't put up their hand. So we are all going to be touched by it in some way at some point. Even if we don't directly experience it, our family will experience it, our children, our workmates, our friends, our peer groups, whatever. You're going to come into contact with it at some point in some way, right?
That's why everyone needs to understand what it's like, what we need, what they can do. It's not just, it's almost like what I talk about as well, is that you kind of would never expect a survivor of domestic violence to advocate for themselves, to say, this is what's happening to me. No, you shouldn't say that to me. Say it this way. Oh, that's not okay. Similarly, with someone who's going through cancer, you wouldn't expect them to tell you, this is happening, I need this, and kind of, they have to hold space for you as well in these conversations, often with early pregnancy loss, where they're minimized by people trying to find the silver lining with the at least statements, and then they're trying to educate you and also manage their own grief. This is one of the only places that this happens, and it's not good enough, right? Like you said, if everyone's going to be touched by this, then everyone has a responsibility and a role to play to understand what they can do for those people that they know and potentially themselves who will go through this.
And I think that there is a wider piece here, which I do try to cover in the book, which I think I did. I like my book, but I think I did, which is, more generally, even what can we learn from this space about how to talk to people about grief more generally?
Yes.
What can we learn from this space about medical misogyny more generally, and how female patients are spoken to about their care, or birthing people are spoken to about their care, or what does that teach us more broadly? And I think there's a lot of lessons. I think to some extent I sort of do see the miscarriage sector as a bit of a canary in the coal mine for a few different issues. And people say to me, when I do media, especially when the book was released and I was doing a lot of media, why are we so bad about talking about miscarriage, I should say? And then I say, well, we're just not very good about talking about grief, full stop,
No.
right? And I think we could learn a lot even more broadly when you and I are doing educational media and talking about how do you talk to someone when they've had a miscarriage. Some of those lessons can be implemented much more broadly than just with people who've experienced loss. So, I think we have a lot to give this sector and these people and these advocates that we work with. And I'm so proud. Like, I always lose the words to say how proud I am to work with the people I work with, including you and all of our members, because without the members, the coalition doesn't work or exist. But I think we have a lot to offer beyond just miscarriage. That's my personal view, and I stick by it.
And I agree with you, Izzy. I absolutely agree. And I think also one of the profound things that I learned through my personal experience is it's not a silver lining, but how much more nuance and grey I get to see now. I didn't see before my losses. I hadn't been touched by any type of loss really before. And that definitely gave me that gift. And it's left me with an ability to have a look at different perspectives on different things. And that, like you said, that ripples out broader than just early pregnancy loss. And I think that that's something that all of our community, once they've come through that point of kind of not getting through it because it's not a journey, but you know what I mean, where you can stop and maybe pause. A lot of women do acknowledge to us that they feel that sense of, okay, well, it's shifted my perspective on a lot of things now. And that's a good thing, right? It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I also think that we as a sector have a responsibility to collaborate with some of other spaces that affect us and also that we can just support, because it's important to do so. And like examples of that would be stillbirth, would be the abortion and choice lobby, because, a lot of us have experienced termination for medical reasons. I also think the endometriosis lobby is really important. I mean, I actually put a press release out when we won our funding, which was the first ever miscarriage funding for Australia, ever, dedicated miscarriage. I mean, that was a huge emotional win for the sector, because while it wasn't enough to fix any, everything, it was such a healthy start, but it was also a message that we matter now and we are important now. And anyway, what I noticed is I sent a press release, and in the press release I said, we also want to congratulate the endometriosis sector for getting this additional funding for pain clinics. And a few people said to me, why are you talking about the endometriosis lobby in the press release? Like, we're the miscarriage lobby, And I said, because if you can't see that we are related and that a win for endo is a win for us, because a lot of endometriosis patients have miscarriages thought to be related to the endometriosis. So if you can't see that a win for them is a win for us, I can't help you. I'm sorry, I can't help you. Like, it is absolutely...
we're not in competition again, coming back to that.
All interwoven, right? We are all interwoven, and together we are stronger, and it is so important. And, I say a lot that the stillbirth, sector has been given a lot of resourcing, a lot of help, a lot of assistance, and they have, but that's because they asked for it. I don't resent them, and they weren't not deserving. That issue was not deserving of it, but, we are trying to catch up. Coincidentally, the stillbirth lobby and the stillbirth people working in the stillbirth space, the people at the CRE in Brisbane, could not have been more supportive, more collaborative, more helpful. Just because I say stillbirth had this much resourcing, it's time for us to get resourced. I'm not saying take it away from them and give it to us. I'm saying you have a duty of care now. You've shown what can be done in this space. Now we need to do it in this space as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, and we've said the same in terms of funding frontline services. We don't want money taken away from, say, Red Nose and Panda. If anything, we're looking to see how we can not reinvent services that exist and make them more inclusive for the early pregnancy loss needs. So, for example, the collaboration with the Panda phone line is a great example of that. Let's kind of get smarter. Let's work together.
And not duplicate.
Yes, there's no need to duplicate. We're all under-resourced. We're all struggling to meet the demand.
Yes.
So if we can be smarter about how we do things together and always remember, it's not about us. It's not about our brands. It's not about our services. It's actually about the person today who's going through this experience, who needs it to be different, who needs to be met with validation, empathy, connection. That's what matters. And does it matter whether that's this service or that service that adds that? Is it this hospital or that EPAS? No, it shouldn't matter. It should be the same, right?
Well, we need to be looking at those end results and going, right, so we need a phone service, and we need a phone service for this, this is what we want it to achieve. This is what we want it to look like. There are gaps here in what we can do. Who can help us fill that? Oh, Panda can help us fill those gaps. Now it's going to be better for the service. It's a collaboration. We've got the best areas of expertise. I mean, this is what the coalition, not to say that the coalition was involved in that, we were not, but we were very supportive of it. But this is what the coalition aims to do, is that if we bring those people together, they can go off and say, what we were talking about in that member meeting, can we have a chat because we're doing something great? We don't need to facilitate it. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
The difference that it will make. It's been a needed voice for a long time. So I'm grateful for you for all your work as well. Thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I am such a fan of your work as well. And I will see you in the next member meeting.
Awesome.
Today's episode may have brought up some feelings that you need some extra support around, and that's totally okay. Head to pinkelephants.org.au to access our circle of support, your space where you can be met with empathy and support through all of your experiences of early pregnancy loss. We're here for you. You're not alone.